I graduated from the University of Cambridge in 2021 with a first in English. And for the longest time, I've always wanted to make a video where I just reflect on what my time there was like, um, and just to talk about what an English degree, an English undergraduate degree from Cambridge gave me, how I think it might compare to other universities in the UK, and ultimately whether I think it was worth it. So if that's of interest to you, then I hope this video is like useful to someone. The English Tripos, as it's called at Cambridge, is divided into two parts. There's a part one, which comprises your first 2 years, and then there's part two, which is your third year, and ultimately the most important year in terms of counting towards your final grade. So in part one, your first 2 years at Cambridge, it's really exciting. So during part one, you're taken through like 5 modules or papers, as they're called, and they span from the Middle Ages to the present kind of contemporary day. There's the medieval paper, which is just as it sounds, like medieval literature, starting from like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and then you've got the Renaissance paper. Then there's a modern paper, which is a lot of Victorian stuff, but then there are two kind of parts of the modern paper as well, and one of them is more contemporary. And then there is a Shakespeare paper, and essentially you get to read everything Shakespeare has written, including the entire collection of sonnets and all of the plays, which is pretty exciting. And then there's another paper called the Practical Criticism paper. So a thing that I always felt made Cambridge slightly different in terms of its English degree from other universities in the UK is that there is this particular emphasis on this idea of practical criticism. It's treated as its entire own kind of category, and it equips you with better close reading skills for all of the papers, like all of the text throughout the ages that you're going to be reading. But what's different about it is that it kind of takes you through the history of what it means to close read, the different kind of literary theories, different movements, different frameworks that were developed through various periods of time. And it's quite special because I remember one of my first supervisions in practical criticism. We all had to walk to like this entirely different college. So it was like an office / living space of a really young professor, and he sat us down and he told us this entire story about the way that practical criticism was actually invented in Cambridge, in a sense, because there was a professor called I.A. Richards who used to just gather Cambridge students sort of informally and then have them analyze like poetry together, and almost like a Dead Poets Society sort of scenario. But essentially that was the foundation of what turned into close reading as almost a scientific endeavor. And it was essentially I.A. Richards who solidified or initiated this idea that English as a subject should be taken seriously and is an entire kind of form of study in its own way. So that's something I always felt that was quite different about Cambridge, that you might not really get at another university. And then the Cambridge system itself also, I think the way that teaching happens there is quite different from a lot of other places. So it's pretty well known that the Cambridge term is an 8-week term, which is a very short space of time. And the amount of work you're actually given during those 8 weeks is quite aggressive almost. And you're expected to produce 1 to 2 essays per week. And then you have supervisions on those essays. And supervisions are essentially just a professor sitting down with anywhere between 2 to 4 students, and you all kind of discuss your essays. And the thing I will say about supervisions is that my personal experience with them really varied from term to term. I remember my first ever term, our supervisions were with professors that were very close to us, like they were our own kind of the professors from our own college, and those were like incredible. Like I learned so much from them. And even though I was like incredibly shy, especially as a first year, like cripplingly shy, but I learned so much from the supervisions. And I actually felt like I could voice myself in the supervisions because of how small and close knit it felt. Because in my first term, there were literally just two of us, me and like one of my course mate, who was also quite shy. And but ultimately it was like really great because we literally would just discuss what we wrote, and our professor would just kind of go off on tangents based on what we had written. And yeah, sometimes the conversation would meander a lot, but I think by the time you get to second and third year, you kind of understand what supervisions are for. And I think by the time I was in third year, I was a lot more comfortable taking a bit more initiative in those conversations and leading, kind of dictating a bit more what I wanted to talk about, rather than just letting the professor kind of go off on their own tangents. So supervisions are really what you make it, in my experience. So since we were going like backwards in the chronology of the papers, in second year, we basically had the summer to read the texts, and the medieval texts were quite challenging, in the sense that, I mean, they were written in Old English. And another cool thing that I really got out of this degree was the ability to read really Old English before a lot of the rules of grammar and spelling and like standardized spelling really set in. That was a really cool thing to experience, and to be able to analyze those texts. And then third year was probably, even though I think in terms of the thrill of just being at Cambridge, that had worn off by third year. And first year was definitely first year was the most fun I had. Third year was the most serious I got, and really enjoyed the degree itself. In terms of what I was researching. So in third year, you have to write a dissertation, and you can choose to replace one of your papers with a second dissertation, which is what I did. And I really enjoyed doing the research on that. I can talk a little bit more about the specific research I was doing in another video maybe. Okay, so in third year, the compulsory components are practical criticism again. Then there's a tragedy paper, which is all the ancient Greek tragedies. And then you have the compulsory dissertation. And then you have a bunch of optional papers that you can choose from. And I did something called the special paper, which was just Victorian literature. And then I replaced the second paper choice with a second dissertation. So that's what I did. So for us, third year was like right in the middle of the pandemic. COVID was sort of in full throttle at the time. So a lot of that year was spent remote for me personally, and for our entire group actually. Like most of us had to do things remotely, but it was good in a way that it really was just entirely academic. Then you couldn't really socialize at all, which is perhaps why I was able to do as well as I did in my exams. So I just wanted to like mention that I always felt that the support and like the mental health sort of services were really good at Cambridge, at least in my experience. I mean, people have varying experiences about that thing. And I'm quite a resilient person anyway, and it takes quite a lot for me to actually reach my breaking point. But I think even then, like I was at my breaking point multiple times, and I even probably cried in front of one of my professors once, which is a common experience, I think. I was very lucky that with every single professor that I had, they were always super nice and super supportive. And I also feel like English professors in general like have a lot of empathy. They are just in their core empathetic people, so I think creating a good dynamic with them is pretty easy. So ultimately, I think applying to Cambridge was entirely worth it. Getting in and doing this degree was entirely worth it for me. But I really think it's important not to oversell or to overemphasize like prestigious universities as being the only kind of route to success, because it really is what you make of your academics. I think the reason it was worth for me was because of what it taught me in terms of resilience, in terms of what it means to pursue a goal and the confidence of achieving a goal um, that it gives you. Because I think after I graduated, even though I still don't feel like I have the kind of career I want, I'm sort of trying to build towards that now. And I did a lot of random jobs, but the sense of knowing that you are able to achieve whatever you set your mind to is something that I really got from going through the process of applying and getting into Cambridge. And in terms of like getting employment, I think the Cambridge stamp, again, it's really good for first impressions, but it's not the be all and end all of employment or nailing and sticking with a job, because that's entirely what you make of it. And the same thing goes with academics. I think regardless of what university you do get into, it's about how much effort you put in and what you make of that degree. So I think with that mindset, anything you do is ultimately worth it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about here. But there are a lot of ideas that I have about videos I could potentially make, because, you know, it's been a few years since I've graduated, and I feel like I have this whole stack of information that's just lying there that doesn't serve a lot of use to me, but I feel like people who want to apply to Cambridge could really make use of it. So I'll make an entire series talking about every stage and every step and how to nail each of those components of an application. So if that's of interest to you, if that's relevant to anyone, I hope you stick around. I hope you subscribe as well. And yeah, I hope you stay tuned for when I make those videos. So yeah, thank you for watching.